In 20 years of Labour's existence, the party has prospered when contesting the nature of modern nationhood, embedding itself alongside broader cultural and social movements. It is an obligation that we do so again as a sense of foreboding takes hold and the right seeks to alter the essential character of this country. So how do we start this? Well, today's conference has been about the good society, and that, I think, is the base camp. Labour has stood for equality, solidarity and justice. Together they are greater than the sum of each. They make liberty. New Labour forged an alliance and caught the mood of the country and national sentiment. But today, when Tony Blair says don't move one jot from New Labour, he speaks the language of a remote cosmopolitanism, often from the first-class cabin of a British Airways jet. In truth, who listens to Labour? When the crash came in 2008, we thought now is our chance. We were wrong. Put simply, there is no liberal progressive majority in England or in any other nation of the UK, I would argue. There is no progressive alliance of like minds. Across Europe, orthodox social democracy is beaten. It lies in crisis. Sure, in places there is energy. Maurice Glasham's Blue Labour has put Labour back in touch with a conservative tradition. Yet that discussion is pitched on a high wire, sliced by misreading and caricature. And that's only part of the necessary debate and reckoning needed. Truth be told, I think we have to face up to it. We're out of touch with the majority of people in the country. In reality, there will be no easy path to the good society. We'll have to navigate our way through the fear of crime, rage around immigration, and the hostility towards people on benefits. That's a fact. We might not like this, but that's the route we're going to have to steer or be rendered obsolete, because people are anxious about the future. They imagine a country and economy and their own lives out of control. Many fear a world without borders, not just national borders, but borders that define social order, family life, and a common sense of decency. Immigration refracts all of these elements into a brittle national sentiment. This has to be unpacked and confronted, or else we'll hand it to the shrill and sour framers of the right, forces that actually exist within all the major political parties. Labour championed a flexible labour market that undermined people's jobs and wages. Its belief in globalisation blinded it to its destructive force. It celebrated a form of capitalist modernisation that became nihilistic, and there's more. Globalisation has devastated people's ways of life. People fear the loss of their culture and their identity, the forces that grant their lives actual meaning. Who are we? Where do we belong? A disorientated culture throws up these questions, but it cannot answer them, and people are left to cope with this uncertainty. Labour recoils from this visceral politics of loss and belonging, and as such, it's been deaf to people's pain. It fears people's bigotry and xenophobia, whilst being contemptuous of those nostalgic for a past. But here's the point, I would suggest. The road to the good society will pass through the pain of loss, the rage against newcomers, and the fear of strangers. It will pass through the nostalgia for a life of the past. This, I argue, is our journey. At times, we've tended to support a multiculturalism that hides the pain of this reality, a practice of avoiding our differences, permission to pass each other on opposite sides of the road. But this is what we must start our dialogue. We are an immigrant nation, there's no going back. What in our differences do we hold in common? How might we live together and create a new vision of England? We demand that migrants must be like us, but who actually are we? They must share our British values, but what actually are our British values? Newcomers must answer correctly the citizens' test, but could we? I don't think I could. When we begin a debate about immigration, we start talking about ourselves. It's not about them, it's actually about us. The great majority of us want the recognition and respect of others and a country that treats us equally and which children can flourish. Yet native cannot demand of newcomer more or less than we demand of ourselves. Do not do to others as you'd not have them do to yourself. A national intercultural dialogue to confront the causes of social insecurity and also to seize the politics of identity and belonging from the right. Actually, it was John Maynard Keynes who understood this. In his 1933 essay on national self-sufficiency, he confronts the decadent institutional and individualistic capitalism that caused the Wall Street crash. He said this: it's not just, it's not virtuous, and it doesn't deliver the goods. And what he asks, shall we put in its place? His answer was an English cultural renaissance, his economic theory grounded in the idea of an economic community. Keynesianism was actually about reclaiming a modern national identity post-empire, a shared set of national cultural values which form a strong defence against the ideology of laissez-faire. And that remains true today, 3 years after Lehman Brothers filed for Chapter 11. The nation state is still best equipped for managing globalisation and rebuilding the national economy. The point of this is, firstly, that ownership matters. We are well on the way to owning virtually none of our key economic assets in this country. Second, investment matters. A national investment bank and radical reform of the banking sector to spread investment capital, decent jobs, wealth creation across localities and regions. Third, protection matters. A living wage, a more secure labour market, and a level playing field for both migrant and native workers. Fourth, a resilient and moral economy needs a people who share civic politics, public goods, and national cultural values. It is about the good society we want in the future, which values family life, promotes the common good through young people's community service, that values new citizens with the celebration of their allegiance, an education system in which history explores our own nation. If we fail, if we imagine the world as it ought to be and not as it is, there will be dark, dark times ahead. We will become a society in which people have retreated from one another, withdrawing from the world into the privacy of their own homes. Think about this a completely different way. When I look at politics today, and Simon touched on this, it's eerily ahistoric. All parties are liberal and progressive, often without memory or tradition. Chesterton once said that tradition is the democracy of the dead. It's about giving votes to our ancestors, of honouring those that went before, especially respecting their struggles and their sacrifices. Think about capitalism. On the one hand, capitalism destroys traditions, families, communities, cultures. And yet on the other, this very destruction creates alliances, solidarity, resistance, relationships, stopping everything becoming a commodity. It was this process of resistance to what people lost, their own dispossession, that is one description of socialism. Not a technical description or a philosophical one buried in a book, but a struggle to defend people from their loss, land, labour, culture, through giving them a political voice. It is one that resists malign change. Dig deeper and you find the central dividing line across the left between one that values tradition and preservation and on the other a politics that looks to the future and desires to uproot the past, a socialism of modernism and rationality. E.P. Thompson responded to his critics who labelled him a romantic and nostalgic when he said, "It is mere English, it has no articulate spokesman, they're all kneeling in the presence of other more sophisticated voices." Thompson mourned the abandonment of an English idiom, the radical heritage of the nation, and the vision of a radical politics that should sink roots into local soil. Ordinary people who struggle to frame history. The parochial and the cross currents that buffet men and women of subsistence and necessity on the one hand, and on the other, the search for self-fulfillment, self-realisation. Literally, what is it to be a freeborn Englishman or woman? Recently, a report was issued by the Searchlight Educational Trust called Fear and Hope. It paints a profoundly disturbing picture of loss, alienation and insecurity, especially in England, especially amongst traditional Labour supporters. Today, Labour claims to be progressive and radical. The coalition of Cameron and Clegg are also radical and progressive. All the political parties are radical, progressive and liberal. New Labour was all about the radical new rather than the past. The project was always defined as one of modernisation, a modernisation that embraced the uncontrollable forces of globalisation. By the end, it embraced a dystopian, destructive neoliberalism. It cut loose from the traditions and history of Labour itself. But what of those who do not want to be uprooted, who seek alliances against the destruction of their ways of life, who fight out of an attachment to place and family? People today yearn for respect, belonging, identity, tradition. Milan Kundera wrote, "The struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting." Have we forgotten the banking crisis of 2-3 years ago? Who's paying the price? In this city, who is paying the price? The little guy, the young mother, the public servant, our children, young students, those on welfare, charities, voluntary groups. Modern dispossession is connected to a loss of our collective memory. in that we've stopped telling ourselves stories about the political struggles that won our union rights, won our democracy, won the Factory Acts, equal pay, the welfare state, the National Health Service, our children's education. And as we've lost those traditions, we've lost our resistance when a government comes along determined to take them away. England's history of the dispossession of the people is played out today in this uncontrollable capitalism, in the arrogance of the banks, which are a law unto themselves, in corporate and media power, in selling off of parts of our English common life to the highest bidder, be they forests, waterways, ports, the post office, possibly the BBC, played out with the political gerrymandering, a modern shrinkage of the franchise, and played out in the intensification of working poverty and in a putative system of welfare reform that punishes the poor, destroys the safety nets that previous generations fought for. Labour is not new. It should be, to quote Dylan Thomas, parochial and magical. It needs to recover the value of the ordinary, the importance of the specifically English struggles of working people. It should not be a choice, but an obligation. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, John. I think actually the key message from this conference is that we can build a good society and a world that is more democratic, equal and sustainable, but it will only come about if we take responsibility and make it happen. The good society will not be built in a day at a conference like this, but it will be built by all of us working together in our communities, building it bit by bit. As always, it's time to be the change you wish to see in the world. Thank you all for coming. Have a safe journey home. And please do continue all your work and get involved in Compass. Thank you.